Human communities are held together by their traditions, and these traditions are often associated with places. Places where traditional events occur, places where traditional activities are carried out, and places in the landscape that figure in traditional religion. We call these places traditional cultural places, or traditional cultural properties. This videotape illustrates what traditional cultural places are, and some issues that are involved in managing and protecting them under federal law. It also illustrates the policies of the National Park Service and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation regarding such places. Damaging traditional cultural places may profoundly affect a community's sense of itself and of its past. For this reason, under the National Environmental Policy Act, federal agencies and those who get assistance or permits from federal agencies must consider traditional cultural places as parts of the environment when planning projects and making decisions that may affect them. Another law, the National Historic Preservation Act, requires federal agencies to identify, manage, and consider historic properties, that is, places listed in or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Traditional cultural places may be historic properties. The National Historic Preservation Act specifically mentions Native American religious and cultural sites and directs federal agencies to consult with Native American groups when their actions may affect such sites. Native Americans include American Indians, Native Hawaiians, and Native Alaskans. Similar efforts should be made to consider places important to other indigenous people. For example, the people of the Micronesian island nations that are linked to the United States by treaty. Congress has also found that federal policies and procedures sometimes impinge on the religious rights and practices of Native Americans. As a result, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act requires that agencies respect traditional Native American religions. This means, among other things, respecting Native American access to sacred sites, whether they're eligible for the National Register or not. Although some Native American groups view the whole earth as sacred, certain locations are viewed as especially important. Places like this medicine wheel in Arizona, and these lands in Hawaii, where ancient traditions were taught, are examples of such places. Places that are not sacred sites can also have traditional cultural importance and may be eligible for the National Register. For example, places where plants and animals are harvested may be important because of the roles they play in the community's ongoing cultural life. Landscape features often figure prominently in Native American traditions. As a result, Native American traditional cultural places are often entirely natural, showing no sign of human use or modification. High places like mountains are often sacred places where Native American spiritualists come to seek visions and carry out rituals. The Hell Cow Historic District, a mountaintop in California, is a Native American sacred site that is eligible for listing in the National Register. Rivers, springs, and waterfalls often figure importantly in Native American traditions. Sometimes people mark traditional cultural places. Here in Idaho, Native vision questers have marked the sites of their visions with standing slabs of rock. But more often, a traditional cultural place is not marked. There's nothing visible here to suggest that Spider Rock on the Navajo Reservation is associated with Spider Woman, one of the first people in Navajo tradition. Not all Native American traditional cultural places are natural features of the landscape, though. Pueblo Bonito, an ancient ceremonial site, is important in the traditions of the Pueblo tribes of New Mexico. And this building has been the headquarters of the Alaska Native Brotherhood at Sitka Camp No. 1 since the early 1900s. People other than Native Americans also have traditional cultural places. The traditional beliefs and land use practices of the Amish of central Pennsylvania are reflected in this agricultural landscape. For more than 100 years, members of Tucson, Arizona's Hispanic community have been leaving offerings at this wishing shrine called El Tiradito, which is listed in the National Register. To be eligible for the National Register, a traditional cultural place must meet specific standards. First, it must be important to the community today. Ancient structures like this ruin of a heiau, or ceremonial house, are still revered by native Hawaiians who place offerings of rocks wrapped in tea leaves on them. Second, except in very unusual cases, the place must have been important to the community for 50 years or more. Third, the place must have integrity. Generally, there are two important integrity issues to consider. The place must be associated directly with the tradition or traditional practice. For example, Hispanic dancers in El Rancho, New Mexico perform this traditional matachines dance at one specific location and have done so for many decades. The place must also have integrity of condition, that is, the integrity of its location, setting, workmanship, and materials must be intact enough that the property retains its significance to the community. The Matachines dance site also illustrates this point. Even though the site is now a parking lot and a bar is nearby, it still has integrity to members of El Rancho's Hispanic community, as demonstrated by their continuing use of the site for their dances. Finally, the place must meet at least one of the 4 National Register criteria. Traditional cultural places are most often eligible for the National Register under Criterion A because of their association with important events or patterns of events in a community's traditional history and culture. Dogwitch Canyon in Southern California is eligible under Criterion A because in the traditions of the local Cahuilla Indian people, it is where their ancestors entered this world from a lower one at the beginning of time. La Unión Martí Maceo has been the fraternal and cultural center for Afro-Cubans in Ybor City, Florida since the early 1900s. Here on Guam, there are special places where native doctors gather medicinal plants that grow nowhere else. Without them, native medicine and its rituals would be impossible. If a historic place is associated with the lives of persons significant in the past, it may be eligible for the National Register under Criterion B. In the case of traditional cultural places, the term persons can refer to people whose activities are documented in historical records, such as Alchise, a white mountain Apache leader, or to people whose literal existence cannot be demonstrated through scholarly study. Sweet Medicine, an ancient and revered prophet, learned how the Cheyenne should live from the holy people in Bear Butte. Places associated with non-human beings may also be eligible under Criterion B. I'itoi Mo'o is a primary residence of I'itoi, an important deity among the Tohono O'odham people of Arizona. Under National Register Criterion C, a place may be eligible for listing if it has distinctive design or construction characteristics, represents the work of a master artist or craftsperson, possesses high artistic values, or is a distinct entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Constructed by Lithuanian craftsmen in Dayton, Ohio, the Holy Cross Lithuanian Church's interior reflects Lithuanian folk art and design. Native American rock art and other artistic works may be eligible under Criterion C because of their high artistic qualities or as the work of masters. A historic district or neighborhood may be eligible under Criterion C if it has distinctive cultural characteristics, even though individual buildings or sites may not be distinctive. Under Criterion D, a place may be eligible for the National Register if it is likely to contain information important in history or prehistory. Traditional cultural places may be eligible under Criterion D. This archaeological site in Sacramento, California's Chinatown is important to the contemporary Chinese American community and archaeologists alike. Many Native American people consider the archaeological remains of towns and villages associated with their ancestors to be traditional cultural places. Such places may be eligible both under Criterion A for this association and under Criterion D for the information they contain. Establishing the boundaries of a traditional cultural place is often difficult. Sometimes there's no obviously correct boundary. Nevertheless, whatever boundary is used must be justifiable. A boundary should be selected based on the characteristics of the historic place, how it is used, and why it is important. Boundaries should not be based on administrative convenience. When the Bureau of Land Management nominated Tecate Peak, a sacred mountain of the Kumeyaay tribe, to the National Register, it drew boundaries on the map at the 3,000-foot contour level because the areas that the Kumeyaay use ritually or regard as sacrosanct are above this elevation. Because the significance of many traditional cultural places has religious connotations, they must be evaluated and managed in accordance with the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Under the First Amendment, it is important to avoid any implication that the government supports the religion itself. It is equally important to consider sacred places in planning so as to avoid actions that inadvertently interfere with the free exercise of traditional religions. Evaluation of a religious property should focus on the role the property plays in the traditions and traditional history of the community and in its continuing cultural life. Many cultural groups do not distinguish between the secular and the sacred, so whether a property is referred to as religious or cultural is often only a matter of semantics. Sometimes, those who value traditional cultural places want to keep information about them confidential. Section 304 of the National Historic Preservation Act allows information on historic places to be kept confidential if releasing it could cause a significant invasion of privacy, risk harm to the property, or impede its use by religious practitioners. When planning an action that might affect traditional cultural places, it is necessary to balance the need for confidentiality with the need to disclose the effects of the action to concerned parties. Actions carried out, assisted, or permitted by a government agency can affect traditional cultural places directly and indirectly. Obviously, many kinds of actions can damage a place directly by allowing it to be removed or rearranged, as with a stream like this one. Public use can also have adverse effects. For example, this was Panther Spring on Mount Shasta in 1967. It is a very important Native American sacred site. After 15 years of visits by people, Panther Spring looked like this in 1991. In addition to physical disturbance, projects can have other kinds of direct effects. For example, the noise from this natural gas pumping station can be heard for long distances up and down the canyon. Indirect project effects also can be very damaging to traditional cultural places. For example, many Native American sacred sites are high places that command expansive views. If those who use such a site gain knowledge and understanding by contemplating the natural world below, then it may be important that these views remain unimpeded and entirely natural. Technological change can affect traditional cultural places too. Traditional farming and land use practices may be greatly affected by introducing modern techniques, even if the traditional farming areas themselves are still used for growing crops. Spraying traditional plants with insecticide may mean that a community's basket makers or healers cannot safely gather the plants they need to carry out their traditional practices. The regional economic changes brought about by federally regulated or assisted development can have devastating effects on traditional communities by driving up tax rates, increasing traffic, and introducing industries and lifestyles incompatible with the traditions of the community. Consultation is the key to resolving conflicts between modern land use and traditional cultural places. Sewage discharge from a proposed development would have polluted the water at these sandbars, where the people of Sandia Pueblo immersed themselves during religious ceremonies. Consultation with the Pueblo and others led the developer to re-engineer the sewage treatment plant, actually improving the quality of the water flowing past the sandbars. At Dogwish Canyon in California, consultation led to the redesign of a water control facility that minimized impacts on the traditional origin place of the local Indian tribe. When potential conflicts are not identified early in project planning, serious problems can result. When this road was designed in Northern California without consulting local tribes, it was routed right through the Hell Cow Historic District, one of the sacred sites we saw earlier. The result was a congressional investigation and litigation that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the road was stopped. To avoid conflict, it is vitally important to consult with those who may ascribe cultural significance to traditional places, Native American groups, other community groups, and their elders, as well as with historic preservation officials. Those consulting must try to understand traditional cultural places through the eyes of those who value them. Native American elders in California refer to this rock outcrop as Bag of Bones. One of the elders drew this picture of it. For him, Bag of Bones is not just a rock outcrop. It is a container full of bones, powerfully associated with the traditions of his people. To learn about such beliefs and the places associated with them, one must listen to and speak respectfully with the people who know about them. One must seek them out and consult with them in ways that are sensitive to their cultural beliefs and values. Sometimes consultation takes place in formal meetings in English with the official representatives of concerned groups. Often, however, those who are gathering information must go into the community and talk with people about their concerns, many times in languages other than English, while respecting customs that may be unfamiliar to people from outside the community, and going with them into the field to identify and interpret specific places. Professional assistance is often required. Cultural anthropologists, sociologists, and folk life specialists may be crucial members of a project planning team. Ideally, under the National Historic Preservation Act, consultation results in a memorandum of agreement about how adverse effects are to be avoided, reduced, or mitigated. Consultation is not always successful, however, and does not always lead to agreement. The National Historic Preservation Act requires agencies only to take into account the effects of their actions, consult concerned parties, and give the Advisory Council a reasonable opportunity to comment. Although this does not always result in preservation of the historic place involved, consultation usually results in agreements that both protect traditional cultural places and allow federal projects to proceed. Here at Coso Hot Springs, the Navy has reached agreements with local Native American groups about use of the sacred springs. And in the Grand Canyon, the Bureau of Reclamation has reached agreement with nearly all nearby tribes, the State Historic Preservation Officer, the National Park Service, and the Advisory Council about how to deal with the effects of water releases from Glen Canyon Dam on the canyon's traditional cultural places. By respecting people's concerns for places important in their traditional beliefs, as well as their values and modes of communication, we can identify and protect traditional cultural places as living parts of our modern environment for the benefit of us all.